these tips for success with scaling Agile. And remember, scaling is not transformation. Okay, scaling, you're talking tool set. Transformation, you're talking mindset. All right, but what they have here is pretty good. You need to train up your internal coaches. That's number one. You need consistent practices and processes across teams. Well, as long as you're giving the teams the ability to choose what they use. If you're mandating everybody's going to use Scrum, you're going to find out very quickly that might not work. Okay? Some of the teams might need to use Kanban or XP or any of the other myriad of agile methodologies that are out there. And so now you're looking at synchronous, where everybody has to use the same thing, versus asynchronous, where the teams have the right to choose. But I guess if you're looking at it from a consistent standpoint, whatever you choose for each of those areas, you need to be consistent. Implementation of a common tool across teams? No, absolutely not. Again, this is reflecting a tool set view, and these surveys are done with companies that are already tool set oriented, so it's no surprise to me that this would come out as number 3. You cannot choose tools, common tool, across your whole, across all teams, until all your teams have been using Agile for quite a while. And even then, you're not going to get any agreement on which tool to use. Okay? I know that, for example, Spotify tried SAFe about 4 or 5 years ago. Half of the coaches loved it, half of the coaches hated it. They threw it out. Okay? So their attempt to apply a common tool across all teams at the program level, that lived a short life. Okay? External Agile consultants or trainers, yes, absolutely necessary, because at best, your internal people will be generalists. You need experts with battle scars to come in and help you and say, okay, here's a landmine, there's a landmine. If you step on that, it's going to explode, it's going to hurt, and it will not be fun. Okay? And those external Agile consultants or trainers, they will help train up your internal trainers. And number 5, I agree with 100%, 1,000%. If your executives aren't with on the journey, if they're only talking the talk and not walking the talk, then it's going to be painful for you to do a scaled agile rollout in your company. It will be extremely painful. And so, and the teams will know that as soon as this or that executive leaves, that it's going to be back to business as usual. And so, from a team's perspective, you almost have to start thinking about, okay, if the executives aren't really with, or if they're only talking the talk and they're not walking the talk, then we need to think about, okay, how do we fight guerrilla warfare? How do we do this so our team still succeeds, that we deliver remarkable results regardless of whether or not our executives are with? Because in the end, as the executives start to see the teams perform, they're going to go, oh, I want what that team is doing. They don't know why, they just know that they want it. They can't put their fingers on it, but they are trying to figure out what's the secret sauce, what's special about this team, how did they actually achieve what they achieved. That results gets the executive's attention. And so that's why you need the executive sponsor with to begin with. But if they're only in half-heartedly or one toe in the water, it's not really going to work. And so you'll still end up with a very frustrated team, even though within the team room, they may be doing Agile and Scrum perfectly. But the minute they step outside the door of that team room, they're hit with the reality of an organization that is in full defensive mode and resisting everybody to the max. So that just doesn't work. So make sure your executives get trained, even if it's only a half day. A half day is better than nothing. And if it's a full day or a couple days, even better. It just goes up exponentially. And then not just that they're trained, but that they're coached and mentored so that they actually start using what they learned and that they can model the behavior for their teams, because that's leadership. That's what leadership's all about, is modeling the behavior you want to see manifested in your teams. If your teams are angry, it's a manifestation of the leader. There's an old Greek proverb that the fish rots from the head. And so, sorry, managers, I don't, and executives, I don't want to, turn you off here, but it all comes down to you guys. You guys are the ones that shape the culture. And it's either going to be a servant leadership-led culture that supports the teams and creates a safe space for them to get their work done. If you're not doing that, if you're not modeling the behavior, your teams are going to have a really rough time. You're just going to frustrate your people and they'll leave. They'll go find someplace else where they can work, where the leadership will support them. And so it's becoming a more competitive environment out there. If you want to be the cool, agile company in manufacturing, you got to model the behavior. Now, in the 13th report, you'll see that scaled agile has now bumped up to about 30%. 19% don't know what they're doing with scaling agile. I find that very humorous. Scrum of Scrums is still in there at double digits at 16%. Internally created is continuing to decrease and is now down to 8%. DAD, disciplined agile delivery, is up to 7%. I don't know where on earth Spotify, it's not a model, has come from, but what they did at Spotify with the guilds, the teams, the chapters, and squads, and all of those things, that doesn't necessarily transport to other companies. Okay, there are ways to take bits and parts of that and apply it, but if you're trying to transplant what they did at Spotify 10 years ago, that's not gonna scale. And every coach, agile coach that I knew at the time, from 5-6 years ago when Spotify was around 750 people and experiencing severe growth pains, now that they're up to 3,500 people 5 years later and have never really turned a profit except once or twice, if I've understood correctly, in their entire history. Now they're at 3,500 people, and not a single one of those original agile coaches that I knew is still there. They all left because the culture changed so dramatically from being 750 people, where they were already experiencing heartburn, and now at 3,500 people, none of those original coaches are left. So this isn't to denigrate the Spotify model. It's just that even the guys who were there, who did the scaling and who created that, are saying, hey, look, this is what we did at that time. It's a snapshot in time. It was never, in my opinion, intended to be a framework with which you scale agile and or even transform an organization. So this is a new one for this past year, and I just found it very interesting that was with. And then all the typical challenges that companies experience when adopting and scaling agile. And you'll notice that they don't use the word transformation on any of these slides, because this is all a tool set view, okay? And so their 5 top tips is get your internal coaches up to speed, get executive sponsorship. You have to have company provided training programs for everybody who's involved. Try to have consistent practices and processes across teams where those teams are working together. Where it doesn't make sense, don't do that. And then implementation of a common tool across teams that, again, keep it within the program so that you can keep your program reporting consistent. Trying to aggregate all of this may end up being a manual process by the time you get up to the portfolio level. And being able to manage asynchronous teams versus synchronized teams or synchronous teams. Those are two different things completely, and most agilists miss that completely when they're trying to do scaling, because if they've never worked in traditional project management, they might not even understand the concept of what they're up against. Okay, so you can download this report. This top one is perfect because culture eats everything for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And organizational culture is at odds with agile values, 52%. Well, that means half of your scaling efforts are going to fail right up front because the culture of the organization is not able to adapt quickly enough to that kind of change. Okay, so you can read down through these. I'm not going to beat this to death, but I love it that culture is number one and that people recognize, hey, our culture isn't going to be able to handle agile. And if you get into some heavy manufacturing engineering cultures, you'll find nothing but resistance and pushback every time you turn around. And so that is absolutely true, but you can still have pockets of success using Agile. You don't have to constrain yourself and throw up the white flag and say, oh, our culture sucks, we'll never be successful trying to implement this organization wide. Well, fine. Find those pockets where you can implement it and you can be successful, and then it becomes fighting a guerrilla war, because then all of a sudden, eventually, the executives will say, hey, well, this team over here, they're really succeeding. What are they doing different? And if they're doing Agile, that will get their attention, and they'll say, well, wait a second, I want that kind of results for all my teams. And so that is an organic way to fight the guerrilla warfare at the team level, maybe up to the program level, that you need to do in order to win the battle. Unfortunately, most Agilists don't view it this way, that they need to fight guerrilla warfare from the team level upwards. They think that, oh, well, we'll just do this organically. Well, we'll all be really old and really gray if we're going to wait for that. Okay? So go ahead and download these reports. You're going to be able to go through those yourselves. They have like every year for the past 10 years or whatever that they've done these surveys, and you can see how it has changed over time. But in this 13th annual, there's some really interesting things in here. And remember, this is only a tool set scaling view. And so they're emphasizing tool sets and being consistent across tool sets. And so the companies that they're surveying are companies that are already tool set oriented, and they're not mindset oriented. Okay? And so that's a huge difference that people need to address and need to understand.